it goes on back and back, and they're really old Grimm's fairy tales, but are distorted by being told down through the years in eastern Kentucky. And as I said earlier, when the Grimm brothers got these stories, they got folk tales, word of mouth stories from people in Europe or wherever they were, Germany, that had been passed down for hundreds of years, and they printed them, and then they got so much bad feedback about these stories are too harsh, they're too unacceptable. I don't know what they actually said.
Violent.
Too violent, too raunchy, too
Violent,
everything.
scary, yeah,
And they had to
everything.
rewrite them.
Full of
And,
sin.
and so now this story is one of those watered down. And what's part of this, the 7 deadly sins are in this story. And I never realized this when I heard it the first time. I never realized it actually until I was about 58. But they're all in there. And one of the the things is about old people being extraneous. Now that's not clear in this story, but that's the background. And old people who didn't have anybody to take care of them, when you couldn't feed the people in the house, were going to be left out, sort of, or worse. Anyway, that sort of gives you a feel for why in the world would anybody ever have this in the story. But it never occurred to me there wasn't anything wrong with it. I was 6 years old or something. So the way it would start out, and I'm sure it was like when they were gathered around the fire, somebody would say, well, you know, there's 8 kids or something, and somebody would say, tell us a story. And somebody, whoever the storyteller was, would say, well, did you ever hear the one about Big Claus and Little Claus? And they heard it last week, but they'd say, no, tell it. And so they'd say, all right, once upon a time, there was Big Claus and Little Claus. And they lived across the road from one another. And Big Claus, he had this big fine house and barn. It had these big fine horses that he plowed with. Little Claus had this little old house and had a little old ugly barn and these little old ugly horses, these poor little old skinny horses. And they lived there with their grandmas. And Big Claus, he liked to brag a little bit. And whenever he'd hear somebody coming up the road, he'd work his way down the climb toward the road and get close to where these people could hear him, but he'd pretend he didn't see them. And he'd say, come up here, my 2 big fine horses. Come up here, my 2 big fine horses. And the people would look, and they'd see the horses, and they'd say, well, look at them horses. Them is big fine horses. Look at that. Look up there at that house. Look what a big fine house he's got. And look at that barn. And then they'd go on up the road, and they'd just be oohing and ahhing and bragging about it. Well, one day, they was out there plowing, and Big Claus, sure enough, he worked his way down toward the road. There's some people coming, and they got up pretty close, and he says, come up here, my 2 big fine horses. Come up here, my 2 big fine horses. And he'd act like he didn't even see them, and they looked over and they seen his horses, and they said, well, look at them horses. Them is big fine horses. Oh, ain't they pretty? Look up there at that house. Look over at that barn. Well, Little Claus, he was down there, and at that time he says, come up here, my 2 big fine horses. Come up here, my 2 big fine horses. And the people looked over at his horses, and they started to laugh. And they looked up there and seen his little old ugly house. And they looked at the horses, and they laughed. And they laughed, and they went on up the road laughing, and they laughed till they got out of sight. You could still hear them laughing. Well, Big Claus was mad, and he come down, and he come over across the road to Little Claus's. He said, you made them people laugh at me, and I hear you call them little old ugly skinny horses of yours, big fine horses again. I'm going to come over here and kill them. And Little Claus says, all right. And Big Claus went on back. Well, sure enough, a few days later, they was out there plowing, big Claus. I didn't see them people. Some people were coming, and he says, "Come up here, my two big fine horses. Come up here, my two big fine horses." And the people got up there and they looked. They said, "Oh, them is fine horses. Look at them horses. Look up there at that house." And about that time, little Claus says, "Come up here, my two big fine horses. Come up here, my two big fine horses." And the people looked over there and they started to laugh. And they laughed and they laughed. And they couldn't stop laughing. They laughed all the way down the road till they went clear out of sight. You could still hear them laughing. Well, the people got gone, and Big Claus come over and said, he brought his maul with him. He said, "I told you what I was going to do. I told you I was going to kill them horses of yours, and if you've done that again." And he hit little Claus's horses right in the head, right betwixt the eyes, and he killed them. And he went on back home. And little Claus says, "Oh, Lordy, what am I going to do now? So I can't make a living if I ain't got no horses." So he thought a while, and he thought, well, maybe if I skin them and put the hides up to dry, I can take the hides and sell them and get something for them. So he skinned his horses, and he put the hides up on the smokehouse to dry. And after a while they dried, and he got hold of them and he pulled them up. He put them under his farm. And he took off down the road going toward town. He's going to go to town and see if he could sell them. As he walked, he noticed when he rubbed his arm as he walked that the hides would squeak. They'd go squeak, 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 squeak. And he went on down the road, and after a while it was getting pretty late, and he hadn't had nothing, hadn't had no supper, and it was getting along toward dark, and he seen a house. So, well, he come to that house, and he didn't see nobody, so he seen there was a light on in the back, so he went around and looked in the back window, and he seen in the house there was a woman and a man sitting at a table, and it had all kinds of fine linen and silverware and all kinds of food, everything you could think of to eat. And while he was looking at him, the woman says, "Listen, it's got late. My husband's going to be home soon. Let's put this stuff up in the cupboard." So they gathered up all the food and linen and silverware and put it up at the top of the cupboard where it wouldn't be seen. And she said, "Now it's too late. You go get on that closet over there. My husband's going to be home any minute." So he got in the closet. She shut the door, and then little Claus went back around the front of the house, and he looked down the road, and he seen a man coming. And so he waited. The man got there, and little Claus says, "Howdy." The man said, "Howdy." And little Claus says, "Well, do you live here?" And the man said, "Yeah." And little Claus says, "Well, I'm on my way to town, but it's got late on me, and I wonder if I can come in and have some supper with you." And the man said, "Well, we probably ain't got much, but you're welcome to come in and have whatever we got. Come on in." And so they went in, and he says to the woman, says, "I brought this fella in. He's out in the road. He's going to have supper with us." And she said, "Well, we ain't got nothing but some old onion soup." And little Claus said, "Well, that's all right." So they sat down at the table, and she gave them the onion soup, and they eat it. And they kind of leaned back, and little Claus had put his hides down beside him. Well, he put his foot on them, and he mashed on them, and they went squeak, 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 squeak. And the man says, "What was that?" And little Claus said, "That wasn't nothing." He put his foot on them and squeak, 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 squeak. And the man says, "What was that?" And little Claus says, "Well, it was just my hides. They talk to me. They're magic, and they tell me things." And the man said, "Well, what'd they tell you?" And little Claus says, "It wasn't much. Well, said that there's all kinds of good food and stuff up in the top of that cupboard." So they went over and opened the door and looked up there, and there it was. They got it out. And they set the table, and they put the food out, and they eat all they wanted. And they leaned back, and they sat there a little bit. And little Claus put his foot on the hides and mashed them, and they went squeak, 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 squeak. The man says, "Well, what'd they say that time?" Little Claus said, I wouldn't want to say. I couldn't tell you." He put his foot on them again, and squeak, 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 squeak. The man says, "Well, what did they say? Tell me." And little Claus says, "Well, they said that there's a man over in that closet, So they got up and they went over and they opened the door, and there he was. And they got him and they put him out of the house, turned him out, and beat him down the road and run him off. Then they went back in. And they sat down there at the table, and the little Claus says, well, I reckon I better go. And the man says, listen, how about selling me them hides? And the little Claus says, oh, no, I couldn't sell my hides. And the man said, well, I'll tell you what. Down in my cellar, I've got a half a bushel of gold, and I'll give you that gold for them hides, because that man knew he could get his bushel of gold, half a bushel of gold back, but for the magic hides, real easy. And little Claus says, well, I don't know. So, well, why don't you show me the gold and we'll see. And so the man went down, brought up this half a bushel of gold. And little Claus looked at it and he says, well, you've been good to me and had me in for supper. I guess I'll sell them to you. So he gave the man the hides and took the gold and went on back home. Well, the next day he went over to Big Claus's house and he said, Big Claus, can I borrow your half bushel measure? And Big Claus says, what do you want with my half bushel measure? And little Claus says, well, you know, you killed my horses. And Big Claus says, yeah, I know I did. And little Claus says, well, I skinned them horses and took their hides downtown and I sold them for this half a bushel of gold. And Big Claus gave him the measure, and the next day little Claus brought it back and there's a gold piece stuck in the bottom. And Big Claus looked at that and he said, you know, if he can get a half a bushel of gold for them little old skinny horses of his'n, I can get a lot more than that for mine. So he killed his horses, and he skinned them and took the hides and went downtown. Horse hides for sale, horse hides for sale. And he couldn't get nothing but $2 for them. Well, he come back home, he went over to Little Claus's and he said, Little Claus, you have fooled me and caused me to kill my horses, my big fine horses. He said, tonight, when you're asleep, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to cut your head off. Little Claus says, all right. so that night, Little Claus got his grandma and put his grandma in his bed, and he went over and got in the grandma's bed. Well, that night, in the middle of the night, Big Claus come over there with a big old knife. He went to Little Claus's to the side and ended up cut Grandma's head off and went on back home. Well, the next morning, Little Claus got Grandma up and took her and put her in the wagon and set her head back on and drove off down the road. And he got down the road a piece and he come to a house. So he stopped and he said, hello, anybody home? So this man come out and he says, Mister, my grandma here is thirsty. Wonder if you could give her a drink of water. And the man said, well, I guess so. So he got a dipper full of water and he held it up and he said, here you are, Granny. And she didn't say nothing. And Little Claus says, oh, she is hard of hearing. You'll have to speak up. And the man says, here you are, Granny. And she didn't say nothing. She didn't move. Little Claus says, well, if she won't take it, just throw it in her face. And the man threw that water in her face and her head fell off. And Little Claus says, oh, you've killed my grandma. And the man said, well, listen, don't tell it. I've got a bushel of gold in my cellar. I'll give you that gold if you won't tell it. And Little Claus says, well, let's see it. And the man brought it out, and Little Claus says, well, all right, I won't tell it. So he went on back home. Next day he went over to Big Claus's. He said, Big Claus, I need to borrow your bushel measure. And Big Claus says, well, I thought I killed you last night. And Little Claus says, no, you killed my grandma. And I took her downtown and I sold her for a bushel of gold.
Sold the grandma?
And so he took the measure and he brought it back the next day. It had a gold piece in it in the bottom. And Big Claus says, if he can get that much gold for his grandma, I get a lot more than that for mine. So he killed his grandma cut her head off and took her downtown, and he says, "Grandma's for sale, Grandma's for sale." And the people got him, and they beat him, and they beat him, and nearly beat him to death. And he finally got away, and he come on back, and he went over to Little Claus's, and he grabbed him, and he said, you've made me kill my grandma, and you nearly got me beat to death. And you're not going to get away this time. I'm going to take you down to the river. I'm going to drown you. Little Claus said, all right. So he put Little Claus in a bag, and he tied it up, good and tight. Then he started off down the road toward the river, and on the way, he come to this church house. And there's all kinds of noise and singing and yelling coming out of the church house. And Big Claus thought, well, I'm going to go in there and see what's going on. So he put Little Claus under the church. And the church is built up on the riverbank on high stilts. Yeah. So he could put that bag underneath the church, and he put Little Claus under there and went on in the church. Well, in a little while, this Little Claus heard something coming down the road. And it was a man with a bunch of sheep, and he could hear them. These sheep going, bah, bah, bah. And Little Claus, as he got closer, bah, started kicking and yelling in this bag, and just a going on. And the man with the sheep heard all this commotion, and he went down and looked under the church to see what was happening. Then he seen this bag jumping around and kicking, and he said, "What are you doing in there?" And Little Claus said, "Oh, I'm going to heaven." He says, "This is how you get to heaven." And the man thought about it, and he said, "Listen, let me in there with you. I'd like to go to heaven too." And Little Claus says, "Well, I would, but there ain't enough room for both of us." And the man said, "Well, listen, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you'll let me in there in your place, I'll give you some sheep. I got all these sheep out here. I'll give them all to you," because he knowed he didn't need no sheep in heaven. So Little Claus says, "Well, all right, untie me and let me look at them." So he untied the bag. Little Claus got out. He looked the sheep over, and he said, "All right, I'll take them. Go ahead, get in the bag." And so he got in there, and Little Claus tied him up and went on back home with the sheep. Well, Big Claus come out after a while, and he got the bag, put it over his shoulder, and went down to the river and throwed it in. And Big Claus come on back home, and he got back there, sat Little Claus on the porch with all these sheep. And Big Claus says, "What? I thought I just got through drowning you." And Little Claus said, "Yeah, you did. You drowned me." And he said, "You know all them little bubbles? Did you see them little bubbles coming up when you throwed me in?" And Big Claus says, "Yeah, I seen them." And Little Claus says, "Well, every one of them bubbles turns into a sheep. And you get to keep all of them you want." And Big Claus says, "Well, I'd sure like to have me a bunch of sheep." Says, how about taking me down and drowning me?" And Little Claus says, "Well, all right." So they got a bag, and they had to walk down. He couldn't carry Big Claus, but they walked down with the bag, got down to the river, and Big Claus got the bag. Little Claus tied him up and threw him in the river, and that was the last of Big Claus. And Little Claus lived happily ever after. Well, I've been telling it over.